Hi and welcome along to the 42 Rugby Show. We'll be looking in depth at analysis and looking back on Six Nations games, previewing Six Nations games and all that sort of thing. We're delighted to be joined by Trevor Hogan, former Leinster, Munster and Ireland lock, and a brilliant analyst now, I have to say.
Don't know about that now. Not in your league, Murray.
We're going to chat a bit about Wales last weekend and look forward to France. But first of all, I guess we got to talk about Paul O'Connell. You know the guy well. You were there probably in Munster when he was first establishing himself. What was he like back in those days?
He's very much the same as has been through all his career. Like one of the things the lads know how young he was, but he was a leader from the start, and he had that influence on everyone around him, regardless of his age. I remember in the early days, he nearly had the same presence as Mick Galway and Peter Clossy, which was just weird. You know that someone that young would have that same impact as those guys who had been, you know, absolute legends. But it's hard to sum him up in words what effect he's had. Yeah. You know, it's just that fact that he was so self-effacing, he was so grounded, unassuming, yet unbelievably ambitious and driven and competitive. You know, to have that combination, you know, he just constantly would expect more out of himself, and by being that nature, it just provoked the same reaction in everyone that was around him.
Like, we talk about his personality so much, I think that obviously stands out, the leader, the character, everyone speaks about that, everyone who comes across him, but like, he evolved as a player so much as his career went on. I think the biggest reward for him was getting that Six Nations Player of the Year even last year. I mean, that's phenomenal for a guy of his age. He seemed to add skills as he went through his career.
That's some achievement, isn't it? Like, to get that towards the end. But that was probably as a result of the type of person, the character he is, that he's always looking to improve certain aspects of the game. And I always remember him, like, in pre-seasons, he'd be focusing on losing weight, losing fat to get leaner, you know, constantly looking ways to get his physique in the right possible position to produce. And that would change as it went along, and obviously that kind of frustrated him, because I could tell, you know, he loved being able to clean and snatch and do all this stuff in the gym and being a real power athlete and driving on the standards there. And towards later in his career, he wasn't able to do that. But it all came down to getting the best out of himself for the pitch, which is what it was about. You know, the one thing to say about him, though, is that he was such great crack, and he'd always had time for the young lads, and always was interested in getting the stories and getting the humour. You know, when we talk about him, it sounds like he's just an absolute psychopath, but he was really funny, and he was just really great to be around, and people wanted to, in a way, you wanted to impress him, you wanted to make an impact on him, because that kind of, you know, just made you feel like you were actually doing something worthwhile if you got a recognition from him. Yeah,
like he was a pleasure, I'd say, to work with as a journalist, because in the modern era, players are quite closed off. They don't actually want to talk to guys that much. Like, he would have given you 5 minutes after a presser to have a bit off the record stuff, to talk about Toulon, maybe say a negative thing about a teammate, but an honest thing. So I really always appreciate that. Like, his personality, his tactical awareness and that understanding of personalities, it seems to set him up nicely to move into coaching maybe. Do you think it's something that he could excel in?
Oh, definitely. If there's one player you could think over the last couple of generations to be a brilliant coach, it'd be him. Like, even in his statement, he's retired. Like, he mentions young Munster first off. He's very heavily involved in the club game, you know, which tells me that this is someone who really loves the game. I mean, I was down with Nina. We were playing Sunday as well. We saw Paul O'Connell there, who has links to Sunday as well. You know, just watching the game, watching the warm up. Came over talking to me afterwards. How was I finding it? Just chatting away with all the other Nina and Sunday as well players after the match. You know, he's just the most down-to-earth player, but you can see an opportunity to learn in the AIL club standard that he can use himself. So, you know, the level of analysis he employed as a player on an line-out alone, you know, it showed that he was someone that's, you know, it would be an absolute waste if he doesn't get into coaching. I think heard him saying there that, you know, he wasn't ruling out the prospect of possibly coming back to Munster at some stage, and, you know, when he's got his bit more experience under the belt.
I think fans are dreaming of himself and Ronan O'Gara coming back, the magic duo.
Yeah.
It'd be spectacular.
It would be unreal, in fairness, and it's probably something that will happen at some stage, but yeah.
He seems like the guy who would go away and learn his trade, though. Like, he talks about guys going over to France, getting those experiences. Even the fact that he was going over there to play, I feel was kind of tying into, look, there's life after rugby, me going away, living in France, not only for myself, my family, it's a new experience, it's something different. He's just, a strong personality, and I guess the hope is that he's going to be kept in Irish rugby in some way.
Well, that's the thing. If he's not, then it would be, you know, a massive loss. The wealth of and the presence that he has, it has to be some way brought back involved to keep another generation of lads who haven't worked with him, you know, keep that going for another cycle.
Just looking back at last weekend, I guess in the stadium, the sense afterwards in the media room, even with Joe himself, Joe Schmidt, was that, you know, this is a good result, this is positive, encouraging. When you look back at the game, when you reflect on it, is it still the same feeling, or is it a missed chance, do you think?
I think, yeah, there will be feelings that patch before half-time, those 8 minutes, if they could have defended that short side better, or if they could have exited after the kick through from Davies, that they were in a really strong position going into the second half, and whether Wales would have got another opportunity. They could have maybe tightened up those areas in the scrum that they actually did in the second half. I think on reflection, they will be really annoyed about that. But the fact that they managed to turn that 16-13 around, get the 16-0. Now that final penalty as well was kind of lucky for Ireland to equalise with a great kick from Sexton. But they'll be just happy to get the draw because the momentum had shifted big time.
Yeah.
You know, from that period just before half time.
Yeah, like the first 30 minutes was exceptional, I thought.
Yeah.
They maybe missed a bit of Paul O'Connor's leadership maybe in that 10 minutes afterwards, where you've got that 13-0 lead, you've got to kind of just sit on it, just be solid. They made 2 mistakes. I think there was a poor line out on the left touch line. Murray box kicked straight into touch. Then there was a tip tackle over the far side. Just a little bit of, I don't know, shakiness, mental shakiness maybe.
That's probably what they'll talk about this week. And you know, it has been an element that's haunted them a little bit since the All Blacks game, is when you're in a strong position, being able to control it, those aspects, and as well maybe defensively as well, that we were a little bit tight on that short side. I know you highlighted it as well yesterday. That's something we can't afford against the French, and Schmidt said it himself. So that spacing and that's the kind of scanning of the players in D, not to give opportunities in the wider channels, to give opposition a foothold. You know, it will happen that they'll have the possession, but don't give them the territory to be able to punish you. Yeah,
like we talked about that in the analysis piece, looking back at the game. Like, how hard is it for forwards? Say you've had to retreat 30 metres off the pitch and then you find yourself on the outside edge. Is it really difficult to get yourself in there? Is that work rate, is it?
Oh yeah, no, I saw that was a great piece. Like sometimes you'll have Rory Best, who isn't that slow, but ideally if you can get Stander outside him. But if it happens off turnover, if it happens off when we lose an aerial battle, there's a split second to change there. And if it's a risk Ireland do commit to is the counter ruck and the barge and the choke tackle, if that doesn't come off, you have got a split second as a front five to get yourself into a comfortable position. You know, so that's where it's most unlikely to happen, is to be able to shift when it's off turnover. And in that scenario, you're better off just holding your zone. Okay. But that's when, you know, they can be seriously punished with the gas that the French will have.
Yeah, absolutely. They just love the width. They love having a bit of depth. And they'll move the ball really well there. You mentioned the tie five forwards and the scrum. Like 3 penalties, 3 scrum penalties and a try. I mean, that's where the try came from. It was a weakness all day. Like Joe Schmidt has talked about Welsh illegality again this year. They always do. Yeah. Where do you think the issue was? Was it just a tight head problem? Was it a collective unit thing?
I think it was largely on our tight head side, and possibly the Welsh loose head. Evans was, you know, it's a little trick that all loose heads do, and Nathan White will be familiar with it, where he just kind of kicks his hips out and his left foot comes out and he tries to steps around. Okay. And if they have the momentum from the engage, from the hit, that little step will create a picture. And if they're tight head, and what Samson Lee was doing was coming in on the hooker, that will create that momentum, that yard or two. And it just meant that for those two or three scrums, Wales were going forward. Okay. And it just, there was a potential that was going to be a penalty try if it didn't squirt out there.
Yeah, that's probably why Tommy O'Donnell has to keep his head down so much, because you need 8 scrummaging in that instance. Absolutely,
you need all 8 staying down, and especially, you know, you need the tight head to try, and it's very hard as a second row or anyone that's not been a prop, but the tight head, he has 2 options. He can go in on their hooker, but that can give the loose head that chance to step around. So if he can stay straight and stay square and even get his right shoulder up, that stops that loose head cheating around the corner there. Okay. That's what they did. I think Roy Best mentioned it after the match. They rectified it in the second half. That Nathan White just stayed square and straight and got that right shoulder up and stopped Evans from coming around. Okay. So that was, but the damage was done, you know, at that stage.
One of the interesting aspects of that Irish scrum is that the second row has changed, and like we always focus on the props. It's natural enough to focus on Nathan White after his game, but like Paul O'Connell isn't behind him anymore. I think Dev switched over to the tight head lock side, and he was loose head previously.
Yeah.
Like, how important is that role, or how difficult is it for a lock? Is it extra workload there?
It's very difficult. The tight head lock is generally your strongest scrummaging lock, whoever it's going to be. And Paul O'Connell was definitely, we were talking about him there, he was the most aggressive, solely focused on scrum lock that you'll come across. You know, I played with him at an underage level. I remember coming off a field, the prop that was ahead of him, who was actually loose at the time, O'Connell actually apologised to him for not giving him enough that day. Yeah. You know, that was at a trial game, under 21 level back in the day. Like, that was the nature of the man, but he just prided himself on giving absolutely everything to his prop. Being honest about it, not all second rows are probably as driven as that, but it is crucial. The tight head lock has to be able to stay on his prop. It can be a problem if the tight head is under pressure and he's having to battle with a loose head that's coming around him. You can lose that connection, and then, you know, you've nothing behind it. Well, not saying nothing, but you're losing that ideal driving position. So it's something that they will probably focus on this week. But I think the real area though was the technique of the props themselves.
I think my instinct would be Mike Ross is fit again. He trained with Leinster. He's ready to play. He's a guy who's come in on short notice with little game time and done a really good job for Joe Schmidt. He's started nearly all the games under Joe Schmidt. Do you put him in there? Is it a risk putting him in there against the French front row of Guirado, Benarou, Slimani? They're world class. Exactly.
You know, it is possibly out of nowhere, but Mike Ross, he used to call it a pinner. He's an absolute pinner. He'd out and out lock that down all his life. Like, it depends on pinning that scrum, that tight head side of it down. So he will give you that. The one thing I would say, Nathan White did well around the field. You know, he pulled some lovely screen passes, which behind the back to Sexton or Murray. He has some great ability in the loose
That's
play.
the Kiwi prop.
It's the Kiwi prop, but it seems to be a little tweak Ireland are adding this Six Nations to add a little bit more width. So White does, and he carried well in general as in the 22. You know, it's a trade-off, but I think it will. Someone's going to have to be able to deal with Slimani and Benarous. You know, it was those three that might raise a doubt, and if Mike Ross is there, he's an absolute pinner. So, you know, it'd be hard to say.
Yeah, you got to weigh those things up, because I think in the World Cup, like Ireland, their front row forwards passed almost the least of any of the top tier nations. It's just not something they've done. So, do you go and use that again, or do you go really solid and set piece orientated in France? It's a big call.
Yeah, it is. It's something they'll be discussing at length this week. I don't know what the focus. I'd say we'll be looking at French game last week. Their set piece is something we can actually target. You know, in terms of their maul defence was quite poor. So if we have a good focus on that area, it could mean that Mike Ross might be coming back into the mix there. Yeah,
let's talk about the maul a bit more, because we didn't see too many chances for Ireland. I think there was one in the second half, early in the second half, where they mauled them about 20 metres.
Yeah.
I think Stander lost the ball. It was a strip later on in that passage. And then there was they nearly scored off a try in the first half on that peel. Really smart move. That kind of thing is encouraging to see, because look back to 2014, they were doing quite a bit of that, and it seems to have faded maybe out of their game a bit.
Yeah, well, I think it's because our teams know, and Wales especially would have known that Irish maul is one of their big weapons, and that they were going to defend it. If you're focused on it, you'll defend it well, and a lot of it is mindset when it comes to defending the maul. So if teams are able to defend it, you have to have variations, and that peel, that was class, just in an area that they would be expecting the maul over the line, traditional, maybe even a shift drive, but they actually just went with a peel and used Stander coming around the back, which means they're having to have their 7 aware, or whoever's at the back of the line, they have to be aware of that, and it just creates an extra element of doubt. Whether the French are even doing, you know, much video work on this is questionable.
I think Novez is on the record as saying he's not really an iPad coach, I think he called it.
Yeah.
He's not really massive on that, so that's an advantage for Ireland.
I think so, yeah. And Maestri, you know, he doesn't strike you as someone that does a lot of homework. He's aggressive. They don't have Pape around there. I would have sensed that he was possibly their main line-out defensive coach. So there could be opportunities for Ireland to vary, you know, or even just go back to that traditional maul this weekend.
Hopefully we see a bit more of that. Like the line out, obviously you have to win your line out possession first to get that maul going. Again, you're looking at guys who aren't there. Peter O'Mahony particularly, he was really prominent for Ireland and always has been in the line out. Maybe underappreciated a little bit, especially on the defensive side of the game. What did you see from Ireland in terms of filling those shoes?
Oh, look, it was something that he's again a man who doesn't get enough probably credit. He has been a real option for us defensively in line, and it seems like he on 5-mans, he's the guy standing in front of Toner. Then behind Toner you'll have Mike McCarthy. So it's the mirroring option. He's the most crucial guy. He's got to read whether to go with that front option, whether to lift Dev, whether he has to come back again onto Dev. It was the one that Mahoney pulled off because he can pull it off so well with a single lift at the front.
Yeah.
Heaslip has that similar athleticism now, and he's been very experienced in reading lineouts, and it's something he pulled 1 or 2 off at the weekend. I think Stander actually got one, stole one as well.
In the second half, I think it was, yeah.
So there is guys that are stepping into that role. I don't think he'll ever replace O'Mahony. He's probably one of the best single lift options that we have ever had.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Alan Quinlan back in the day, but O'Mahony is, you know, one of the best we've ever had. And but he's really stepping in there now.
Yeah. So like single lift, literally one man at the front. I guess it just frees up so many other options at the back.
Well, especially in a shorter man, if it's a 5 or a 6, you'll free up a whole pod then on Dev that can just focus on looking after any of the movement behind and leave Heaslip. But Heaslip then has the ability, if it's not on, he can still return. But it requires lots of core, lots of spring, explosive power, and a good lifter in front of you, which Jack McGrath is, and Healy, to be able to hold the guy on his own.
Yeah, like Ireland's own ball, their own throw into line out last weekend, like the return was good, like the success rate, but that never really tells the full story. I think they lost one, but there were other shaky moments, and France have good jumpers. I think Shuli is a really good defensive line out player. Do you think it's a throwing issue? Do you think it's a calling issue maybe, or just a lack of familiarity in the line out?
There's a combination there, I'd say, as well. They were up against Wyn Jones and Charteris. You know, they were very, very competitive, you know. I do think, you're saying Shuli stole one last year. I remember a crucial one in the Six Nations on us. He has pinched a few. I don't think they'll be as sharp in the air as the Welsh. So, but it was a combination of a few things. They still won the ball. Possibly the delivery is something they can tighten up on. But no, generally I think it was a solid line-up performance. Yeah,
like summing up all that set piece, like it is going to be massive. There's other elements to the game, obviously, that narrowness in defence from Ireland and spreading the pitch. Do you think this is going to be a more difficult test match than against Wales, or do Ireland need to greatly improve, or just hit another performance level similar to that?
I'd say you'd have to taking it all, the 6-day turnaround into account. It's probably going to be more difficult now, I would say. But you have a French team as well, possibly under pressure after a poor enough performance. Scraping by Italy, probably should have lost. Take that into account as well. You know, in a way, the Welsh maybe complacency helped us, that brilliant start. It's always harder to produce, and this is the challenge for Ireland throughout the years, is to produce back-to-back big performances. You know, it was our big problem in the World Cup. They might be able to, you know, even use that as motivation this week. They produced hugely against France and fell a little flat then against Argentina. Can they back it up again this week? They'll have the break the following week. I think it's a bigger challenge nearly because of all those factors, the 6-day turnaround and the bodies that are going to be wrecked.
I guess finally, coming into the Six Nations, I know I was probably pessimistic, and that was the general mood, I guess. I don't know how you were feeling about it, but after that first game and building into the France game, where do you stand? Do you think, are you more optimistic about what Ireland can do?
I'd always be generally optimistic. You know, I sense the doom and gloom around, and definitely around the provinces, you can understand that. But the optimism when we have Sexton on the field, you know, form maybe dipped slightly for Leinster, but he just produces in the big games. If we had Sexton and you could say O'Connell against Argentina, you know, it could have been a completely different story. I think, in general, I'd be positive that they can produce this. Whether we can do it again against England and get the historic one, I'm not sure.
That's a tricky fixture. Well, look, loads more to look forward to. Thanks a million for chatting to us and giving us a bit of insight. So
no worries.
Really appreciate it.
Sound, Murray.
Cheers.
Okay, thanks.